What if somewhere in the Cascades or Sierras, you could make Mount Rushmore for women's sports? Who would you include?
Oh my gosh. Well, Megan Rapinoe has to go there. Absolutely. Diana Taurasi, Sue Bird. I'm going with all locals. Simone Biles, Sabrina Williams. The list is too long. Billie Jean King, Michelle Akers. Should I stop?
We're going to need more mountains is what you're telling me. There's a moment every now and then when culture doesn't just evolve, it shifts fast. And we on the West Coast have had a front row seat. Think back to Brandi Chastain's shot heard round the world at the Women's World Cup in 1999, where? The Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California. She won a trophy for the U.S., and her sports bra-bearing celebration marked an inflection point in the rise of women's sports. Since then, the drumbeat of women's sports has grown steadily louder. Women's sports aren't just emerging anymore, they're exploding. Viewership is multiplying quickly. Great women athletes could crowd Mount Rushmore, and young new stars, new leagues, and new teams, they're everywhere. Salaries and sponsorships are starting to flow. But movements don't live on screens, nor are they denominated in dollars. They live in places. Places where we gather, cheer, argue, celebrate. Places where we find belonging. Places where we find members of our tribe cheering for the same team or the same great games. Welcome to Pacific Time, where we ask the what-if questions about the West Coast. I'm Greg Ammerfell, and today we're exploring questions that mix business and culture, play and politics. What if women's sports finally had the cultural power, physical space, and investment they've always deserved? And what if that shift started and was destined to start here on the West Coast? My guest today is Jen Barnes, founder and CEO of Rough Tumble, a pioneering sports bar for women founded to showcase women's sports. If you live in Seattle, you know the story. It is packed often. It's not a niche. It's not a novelty. It's a signal. And the signal is loud and getting louder, like any good crowd of raving sports fans. Jen's vision for Rough Tumble began with a simple but stunning realization. Even as women's sports exploded with world-class athletes and massive fan enthusiasm, she couldn't count on a bar to turn on her big game. And if culture is shaped by what we see on screens, in stadiums, and in each other, that absence matters. Rough Tumble claimed a space that had been hiding in plain sight. It's a space with women's sports and women's sports fans at the center. A place that says, yes, your joy deserves a screen, lots of them, with the sound on and the full roar behind you. A place designed to serve more than half of the population, nearly half of NFL fans, more than half of Olympics and World Cup watchers. A place that just opened its second location and may well be expanding to places near you. I started by asking Jen about when she realized women's sports deserved a place of their own.
I often say it was really, truly a light bulb moment. I don't think we often experience very many light bulb moments. And this one really was. It was like, oh my gosh, I have to do that. And that light bulb moment was, I wasn't able to watch women's sports, particularly a rain game, a couple of years ago. And I realized with a lot of clarity that nobody was playing these games. Nobody was playing women's games equally with men's. You couldn't really guarantee that a women's game would ever be on, let alone that somebody would play it even if you asked. And the inequity and imbalance on that just didn't add up to how I experienced women's sports. Women's sports are just technically fantastic and a lot of fun to watch. And we have amazing athletes in equal proportion to men, but we're not playing them. When I hit on this idea to create Rough Tumble, there was also a drive that I had to create space for women. And so it wasn't just about turning a TV on and making sure that there was a woman athlete on it, but it was also creating space for women to come together, for community to come together, whether they identify as women or not, to uplift women. And women are not given enough space. We don't get equal support. We don't get equal funding. We don't receive equal opportunity to men. And so it was like, wait a minute, I have this opportunity to create a space for all of us to experience women in their biggest, best selves. And so, when you look behind, I'm moving off the screen here. This place is huge. It's 4,000 square feet. And we routinely sit a seat 165 seats, but it can expand up to 255. And so, it's high ceilings and big windows, and just physically is a large space. And there's a lot of psychological bigness and emotional bigness that comes with that as well. And you really do see it when women walk into the space and they're like, whoa, it's not just a little small space. It was actually something big for all of us, and it feels extra special. So,
well, I'm glad you're talking about space, because I was curious to know what you want people to feel the moment they walk into Rough and Tumble.
I want them to feel at home. Truly. I mean, that's been a feeling that I think everybody resonates with here. So it's worked. And it takes a lot of engineering to get to that point. There's a lot of people who, whether they are men, women, non-binary, trans, how you identify gender-wise, a lot of people are not particularly welcome in the sports bar environments. The sports bar environments are historically really created to support men and men's sports. And within that, there's often some toxic traits that tend to come out. And I know most women that I know and most men that I know actually don't really love the environment, but they may really enjoy watching sports. And so I wanted to create a space where everybody felt super welcome and comfortable to come in here. I often talk about this being a third place. So not your home, not your work, but the third place that you want to go. And that is something that a lot of people comment on without me soliciting that. So there's a sense of warmth and comfort and being seen and being fed, not just with food and drink, but also emotionally and psychologically. That is very much part of the weft and weave of Rough and Tumble. It's that, and it's also physically walking into a space that feels comfortable. For women in particular, we have a constant space in our mind that is taken up with physical safety. And I wanted that to really be mitigated when you're in here. So there's high ceilings, it's big windows, it's well lit. The bathrooms feel big and bright and clean, and it feels good. And it also, I know I feel like this when I walk in here. I feel like I can stand up straight and like, this space I'm not having to slot in or fit myself into or around someone or something else. I get to just be me in this space. And so any and every time that we can help anybody feel like that, it's pretty awesome.
So when did you first sense that Rough and Tumble was going to be more than a bar, that it was going to be a community?
The minute the idea hit. So well before she actually was built or, had a physical existence or the doors opened, women's sports in general and the fan base of women's sports are a really wonderful community. There's if you haven't seen it, there's a t-shirt that's gone viral by the brand Together with the X Together, that everyone watches women's sports. And it's, a lot of times you'll be wandering around the country or on a plane or at a restaurant and you'll see somebody wearing that shirt and it's like, oh, you're my people. And that community is something that women's sports in general, regardless of the sport, has really done a really beautiful job of integrating into the culture of fandom. And I think in general, like just that sense of uplifting one another and creating space for one another and being super welcoming is something that's very intrinsic to women's sports in particular. So there was no question in my mind that was going to translate into this space, especially if I could create a space that welcomed it, that was going to be the case. So
I can't wait to talk about fandom, and we will. But before we leave the space, what surprised you most in the early days of starting Rough and Tumble?
Thinking back, I think today is the 9th. Today is actually the 3-year anniversary of opening the doors.
Happy anniversary!
Thank you. It's funny. I'm not sure that a ton has surprised me. I think I've been more inspired, and that might be a small twist on the verbiage there. But the things that have probably inspired me the most are just seeing how this big, bodacious, brave girl that I think of Rough and Tumble is really her own entity. Like, I'm just here to help create space for her. It's just beloved. And it still to this day will make me cry when I look around the room and see, nearly 250, 300 people happy and joyous in this space, cheering on other women, wanting other women to be their best, biggest selves. It's that old Kevin Costner, if you build it, they will come from the movie. But it's so true. If you build it, they will come. And that's really what this space has been. So I'm not surprised that it worked, but it is always inspiring. And there are moments where I do have to pinch myself and be like, oh my gosh, like it worked, So
What's the story on the name of the bar?
it's a couple different things mushed together. When I was growing up, I was kind of a little tomboy. I like climbed trees and made mud piles and built forts and played baseball. But I also loved to cook and play dolls and, had makeup. I liked all the things, and I'm just as comfortable in jeans as I am in a black dress and lipstick. And so to me, there's a little bit of every woman has some rough and tumble in her, whether she enjoys being polished and really highlighting all the feminine traits that maybe she's carrying with her or not. We each have different levels of that kind of rough and tumble in us. And I think when it comes to sporty girls in particular, you really start to see some of that. So there was a little bit of a tip of the hat to that. And just really pulling on women's strengths. That is a reference point to that. And it's something that I asked the team that I worked with on the naming to really kind of help me carve out and lean into. But then the other element that started with that, right? And then the other element that led into that is the early 1900s in England. So World War I was going on, all the men go off to war and the women are staying behind and handling the factories and everything like that. And during that time frame, football or soccer, as we call it here in America, stopped. All the men's games, Arsenal and stuff like that, those big Chelsea games were stopped because all the men were off at war. And so women started playing a lot more soccer. The women's teams became exceptionally good during this time period. And we're filling stadiums at 65, 70,000 fans would show up for these women's games. It was essentially a lot of the factories. So it was factory teams. One of the ones that really became a standout was called the Dick Care Ladies Club FC. And they were from Dick Care factory. They became one of the best women's soccer teams in the world, went on to be world champions and play the US men and go on tour and stuff like that. But when the men came back from the war, the FA, which is the governing entity over there for men's soccer, for soccer in general, outlawed women from playing soccer. And for 50 years, women were legally not able to play soccer. And a lot of other countries followed suit after that. There are differing stories as to why, but the one that is historically proven is that they wanted men to reintegrate into society. And they wanted women to stop playing in order for that to happen. So Dick Care Ladies Club, there were a lot of women on that team that said, I'm not going to hang up my cleats. I'm going to keep playing. And they would, keep playing on men's grounds, but we're now men only grounds and that kind of thing. And so I felt like that grit and that gumption, the courage to say no when they were told they couldn't do something that they were excelled at and should be able to continue to do, deserved honoring. And so that story, and they were, this is the other part, was they were derogatorily referred to as the rough girls. And so when we came upon that, and I had already been talking about being kind of rough and tumble on the inside and stuff. So anyway, that's the story.
Jen, how does representation in sports culture connect to representation in politics and civic life?
From a societal community building perspective, sports are one of the most pivotal, important ways that we come together as a community. We all have hobbies, we have different things that we do, but sports are often something that translates across borders, translates across language barriers, political systems, belief systems, etc. It's a watching sports and being a sports fan is like an emotional experience. We don't have anything else that replicates it. It's something that most of us can enjoy if we want to. It's also one of the more public things. And so there's a fandom that comes with sports and sports, like famous athletes, that's very similar. It's got a lot of celebrity to it. There's a lot of marketing that goes behind it. There's a lot of sponsor dollars that go behind it. And so the sponsor sports world is worth billions and billions and billions of dollars on a worldwide basis. Right now, women receive less than and get paid less than 1% of all sponsor dollars. And so gender equity in sports is important from many, many perspectives. There's, we need to be watching women athletes, young boys and young girls who are coming up. They need to see women as leaders. If they don't see women in positions of leadership and strength and in equitable ways, they're not going to know that it's even possible. But when they see women athletes being strong and being leaders and being competitive and being coaches and officiants and athletes, it changes how we all perceive women in general. And what's really interesting is that there's a lot of data that's starting to come out around the fact that no matter what sport they're playing, women athletes are naturally perceived as a healthy level of strong. And this is by moderate and conservative voting blocs as well. And so there's this moment that we have ahead of us and currently where women athletes have the opportunity to actually begin to shift political viewpoints, decision-making, and voting, because we as a collective look at them as a positive strong versus potentially a strong that's considered bossy or, shrill or, all of these terms that we hear associated with women who are speaking up. It's important for girls and boys who are growing up to see women as athletes because it changes how we look at women in general. It changes how we grow up. And that's why Rough Tumble is all ages. It's just as important for kids to come in here and see women athletes on the screens as it is for young girls to be inspired to maintain being in sport. Just like everything else when it comes to having gender equity in positions of power and decision-making, it's no different in sports than it is in the White House, than it is in the boardroom, than it is in Congress or PTA. We are better when we're balanced and representing everybody's viewpoints.
So let me ask a couple different questions about that. And I think they're both unfair in a way, but I want to hear your take on it. You've created a space that centers on women. I wonder about how you keep it inclusive for men, for queer fans, for trans fans, for non-binary fans, for people who frankly might not have cared about sports that much before. What tensions come with operating a sports bar?
It's something I think we live with or address or embed in everything that we do every day. It's something I wanted to make sure was core to things from the get-go. So in prioritizing women to get to a point of gender equality, it does not mean that we are an exclusion of anyone else. We are, in fact, just trying to create more balance. And that in and of itself creates community for everyone. If you identify as a woman, you're a woman. We are so trans inclusive here. We very intentionally don't use the word female because that's talking about sex rather than gender identity. I identify as queer. It's embedded into everything that we do here. I came out when I was 16. So it's queer owned. It's so queer inclusive. It's often spoken about and referred to as a lesbian bar. And I love that. It isn't though. It is actually a space for everybody. So it is, but it is not that exclusively. And I think that's what's so great about it. I think most human beings really enjoy spaces that are actually just made up like life is. This is just what life is.
I was going to chime in to say, as a man who has gone to Rough and Tumble many times to watch women's sports, to watch men's sports, it's just a great space to be in community and to watch sports.
Yeah, it's just a great space. I mean, we play men's and women's sports equally 50% of the time, right? If you're a long time, 49ers fan and you come into town, you're going to be just as happy here as anywhere else. We have sisters, we have moms, we have aunts, we have grandmothers, we have best friends. We work in environments that are, a lot more balanced. We walk down the street and that's all that we're doing. We have to work very hard to not be exclusive. And unfortunately, our world for a long time in the sports world has been exclusive. The sports industry has been built up and created to uplift men only. And the sports bar environment around that is working off of what's being fed to them. And when you have 85% of all content out there is men's sports coming at you, you have to work a lot harder to even access that 15%. So all we're doing is just engineering equality, and it's just going to take a while to actually see what that engineering of equality that we do every day here looks like out in the rest of the world. So it's really important, and everybody is very welcome here. You do feel it when you're here. You don't feel excluded. I think there are certainly men out there who don't think they're welcome, or wonder if it's just a women's only space, or that they're going to be bored watching women's sports. And we routinely, all the time, explain to them that it's not that. Please come in, enjoy. And they're like, oh my God, this is the best sports bar I've ever been to.
And I was going to say, I've been in sports bars that seem like they cater to men, and they have dingy carpet and rickety stools and guys drunk bellowing at the TVs. Like, it's not a super fun environment. So I think you're doing something that's good for anybody. The dare at the center of this is, what does a place feel like if it's designed for inclusivity?
Yeah, which is just really all of us, right? It's just actually when in the United States, where women are 51% of the population. So when you're creating more male-dominated, exclusive places, that actually doesn't feel as normal as the rest of the world does. But we become so used to it. It's ingrained in us that is what to expect. And so it's just a shift. And usually people are like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about the fact that a sports bar is generally not like this. And this is so much better. A lot of what you talk about on your podcast is about small business. And just from a pure revenue generating standpoint, why wouldn't you want to make money off of all the things? So I think, I do get asked that question a lot. Are you eliminating revenue generating opportunities from guys who want to come in and watch sports? And I'm like, well, they do come in. We are selling them beer and hamburgers and nachos and wings. And we're also benefiting from the revenue production from women's sports fans. So when you think about it, we're actually doubling the revenue generating opportunities. And to me, that's just purely smart business.
And worth noting, you say, women make up 51% of the population. I think I was reading that women make up 45% of NFL fans now, that more women than men watch the Olympics, that more women than men watch the World Cup in soccer.
Yeah.
It seems logical to serve them.
Well, and I think it's 89% of women make all the spending decisions too. So all consumer spending is heavily managed by women decision makers. And we are in the midst of one of the biggest wealth transfers of our entire life, anything we'll ever see in our lifetime. In very short order over the next couple of years, more than 90% of the wealth in the United States will be managed by women. I think anybody who's not paying attention to that is just pure. They're not making good business decisions. But I think any business that's representing and speaking to and creating business and revenue generating opportunities for all of us is just purely going to do better.
So serving women makes sense. Operating inclusively is good business.
It is just purely good business.
There's another side to that point, Jen, though, which is whether you ever worry that you're being asked to kind of carry the women's sports movement in a way that's not fair to a small business.
We are carrying a lot. I mean, I know that I personally feel like I have a mantle that I've chosen to pick up, and it is a lot heavier of a mantle than I wish it were at times, but it's not something that I dislike. It is a lot more work than I think anybody might imagine. I often talk about the fact that like if sports bar ABC down the street didn't make it for whatever reason, or passed away, if you will, it's not going to affect how well the Mariners or the Seahawks or the Sounders or the Yankees or whoever do, right? Now, if Rough Tumble doesn't make it at some point, it's going to have a significant impact and conversation at an international level in women's sports, because Rough Tumble is a very key component of the flywheel that is women's sports. So we serve as a hype mobile. We serve as, merch provider. We sell merch for teams that is often inaccessible any other way. We serve as a media platform. We serve as a fan base roast mobile, right? Like we are teaching people about a sport they may not have watched before. We are building excitement. The number of season ticket holders that the Reign grew over the first year that we opened was a lot. I wish we still had the numbers. I wish we had like a direct link from here to there. But we helped fill the stadium actively. It was something that I sat and had conversations with the Reign about, and we watched it change over that first year. When I opened Rough and Tumble, there was one or two places around the state that were sometimes playing Reign, and but it was like they played some Reign games. It was great. We love them. They're awesome, and it wasn't quite as much of an intentional space build as Rough and Tumble is. So I opened in December, and the first postseason for the NWSL was in late 2023. There were upwards of 50 watch parties for the Reign around Washington State because Rough and Tumble had proven that women and women's sports fans turn out for these games. It is a huge responsibility. It's a responsibility that is not, Rough and Tumble serves as like the brick and mortar access points for being a fan of women's sports, but it is so much more than that. It's a community builder. It's all the things that I just said. And because of that, we actually are, we are experts in the field of women's sports. People travel from around the world to come here. And, if she doesn't make it, or if we don't execute in our best possible authentic way, the risk is that it feeds that incorrect conversation point that like nobody watches women's sports, which is, most people realize is not true. But we don't want to add any fuel to that. So it does feel like a huge mantle. Is it fair? I don't know if there's anything fair or unfair about it. I think I'm honored to be part of a long line of women who have been lifting up a lot more than I am today. When I think about the team members here who, I couldn't do this. This is a whole group of us. Every single staff person on this team is doing the same damn thing that I am. And it takes a lot of us. And it's, even on the hard days, we're all like, but for women, this is for women's sports. This is for women, and we're making the world a little better. So.
Well, and let's talk some more about the load, because, hey, you just highlighted that you're 3 years into having launched your small business. And I think a lot of small business owners would probably say, okay, I'm starting to get it. It's working. People are coming. Let me coast for a minute and catch my breath. That's not what you did, Jen. You decided to open a second bar. Can you talk me through that decision? To me, it's a logical step if what you're doing is trying to build a movement around women's sports.
Yeah, it is. Since the very beginning, since before the doors were even open, I knew that I wanted to grow Rough and Tumble into something that had multiple locations and was offering even more opportunities to remove barriers to access of watching women's sports. Because what we do is a service, frankly, because right now, many of the sports that are played by women, that are being filmed, that are being produced for television or streaming, are not available on regular cable. So when you grab your remote and turn something on, you're still being fed primarily men's sports. It takes a lot of work to have all of the streaming applications that many of these sports are landing on. And most people don't have the financial ability or access to be able to stream as many as it takes to watch the games that you want to watch. So we do that. We take that on. We have an ostentatious cable and streaming bill every year. I mean, we're just for this location, we're at about $35,000 a year, which is a lot.
This is the sound of my mouth dropping open.
Yes, right. But you can't become a fan of League One volleyball if you don't get to watch it. But when you watch it, you're like, all of a sudden you're a fan. So when I talk about building a fan base, that is what we're doing. We're literally making sure that you can see the game so that you can become a fan, so that you can then follow the players, so you can buy the merch, so that you can make sure that, you watch more games, so that then more games get programmed, because Nielsen ratings and clicks and all of that are tracked. And so the more we watch, the more everything grows, right? Now I'm forgetting the start of your conversation. What the question was? Is the decision to open another one?
Yeah.
We're busy. We're busy often and most of the time. There's a huge market for this. We also, in Seattle, we don't have transit. We don't have light rail that runs everywhere. And so sometimes if you're driving or catching a bus from one neighborhood to another, depending on where, it can be 45, 50-minute drive. So it's a big city, and we are the capital. I always talk about this. We're the capital of women's sports. So we have a lot of women's sports fans that like literally we weren't able to serve. So the second location is in Columbia City, and we just opened this weekend. And it's already full. It's been full all weekend. It's wonderful. But it's, we have a built-in fan base who's been coming all the way to Ballard for the last 3 years for, 45, 60-minute drives. And so they don't have to do that now. So I think it's also just from a proof of concept perspective of what I'm doing with Rough and Tumble can be executed at the same level and do well at another location in our same city. Something's going well. We're doing something right for sure.
Could we talk about in winemaking? They talk about provenance, right? The terroir. How does the soil and the landscape influence the wine? Why did Rough and Tumble come into existence in Seattle? The other sort of pioneer in this is Sports Bra, the women's sports bar in Portland. Why is the Northwest? Why is the West Coast making these breakthroughs for women's sports and women's sports fandom?
Seattle has really always been at the forefront of women's sports. The Seattle Storm have been around for a little over 25 years. They're one of the first WNBA teams in the league, and the same goes for the Reign. So the Reign is one of the founding members of the NWSL, as are the Portland Thorns. The NWSL is seeing tremendous growth. We also have D1 and D3, stellar athletic schools here in Seattle. And so we've been a hub for just a very, very, very long time in women's sports. So now what we're experiencing is this like third and fourth generation of women's sports fans, because they've grown up going to the Storm, going to the Reign, going to UW basketball. And so we're really starting to see this thing, take off, which is fantastic. It's a little bit of a bummer that it's taken so long, but that's not a Seattle thing. That is more of a national thing. I think we tend to be pretty progressive here. I think Seattle is progressive. I think we churn out tremendous athletes. I think some of the reason behind that is that we have a temperate climate. It allows us to train differently and pretty consistently, if not a little bit soggily. So, we also have a very high education rate here in Seattle. We're one of the most highly educated cities in the country. That leads to a lot of we have one of the highest women CEO rates in the country as well, high leadership in women in board positions, and when you think about the fact that we have so many women in positions of leadership, and that 94% of all women in C-level positions have played sports all the way through college and credit their success to being an athlete, that some of the jigsaw puzzle pieces start to come together. When you think about watching athletes compete or play from a purely technical perspective, women athletes are generally better. Male athletes will tend to use more strength and brute force. There are also a lot more positions available, more teams in the league, a deeper bench potential. And so you don't have as many high level athletes on those teams. Whereas on the women's side, we'll just use the NWSL for an example. If we have 13 teams in a league and you've got however many people on the bench, right, and 11 women playing on the pitch, that's a lot fewer opportunities, but you still have just as many young girls coming up through the ranks. And so there's very few positions for them to actually go into, which means by the time you actually see somebody playing on the pitch, you are seeing like an all-star player every single time you watch a game. And so anytime we have an opportunity to watch a women's game, I think it's really easy to fall in love with watching the game. And we have in Seattle we churned out a tremendous number of top level athletes and teams for many, many years now. There's a lot of reasons. Mostly it's just because we're awesome.
Agreed. Back to expansion for Rough and Tumble. Do you care to talk about your plans?
I'm happy to talk about the fact that I want to expand. I don't have like a location per se that I would want to name right now. I think next year, hopefully we'll see sort of the next phase of things start to adjust a little bit. My goal would definitely be not just locally, but nationally and internationally. A year and a half ago, we became one of the ownership members of the Salmon Bay FC, which is a pre-professional women's soccer team here in Seattle. We're the first to bring a USLW team to Seattle. And that's the kind of thing that Rough and Tumble does, that's in addition to creating a space to watch the game and be a fan, we're also creating other opportunities for women athletes and fans of women's sports to grow the game, if you will. And so I think it's really an ecosystem. It's less of just one element and another element. And so I hope that ecosystem itself also continues to expand.
It's funny, in preparing for our discussion, Jen, I was mentioning to somebody that you were expanding Rough and Tumble to a second location. And I, assumed that there would be more, maybe many more. And they said, oh my gosh, how do they keep it from becoming Buffalo Wild Wings? So here's the question. How do you keep your soul? Because what you have built is so soulful.
It is so soulful. I was actually just having this conversation yesterday. It's going to take a lot of work. It really will. Because I think you think about the Buffalo Wild Wings of the world, and that comes down to a lot of trade dress and licensing, and then it's just stamp and repeat. And I've said from day one that I don't believe that franchising is the way for Rough and Tumble to grow. Franchising is, I think, where a lot of that stuff starts to slide. The authenticity, the heart, the soul, because then what you're doing is just kind of licensing and making sure that things are exactly the same in each location. And that's where you lose the soul, right? That energy, the vibe when you walk in, that feeling of like you're at home is going to be the most challenging to get right. I have a lot of thoughts on that. And I've worked pretty hard to think through ways in which we do things here at this first location that can be semi-replicable, but really speak to the local community, whether that's just in the adjacent neighborhood or, another state or another country. I think there is without a doubt a way to do this. I think it is more challenging. I think it is harder. I think there's a way to get it right. And that's the part that I think I'm most excited about when I think about the challenges of this business and how we continue to do well at it. That's one of the things that I'm excited by, that challenge, because I think of it as being the ultimate way that we will have succeeded, is if we can pull that off.
So what keeps you up at night? The risk of scaling too fast or not scaling fast enough?
For me, this business is full of both and all the time. I mean, we are the first to ever in this world create a space that is purpose built for gender equity. It takes so much work because most places out there, the sports bras, my friend Jenny owns that. They play exclusively women's sports. They are going down a franchise model and looking to open a couple of others in the next year. It's not easy to do either one of these things. And then I think about the sports bars down the street here that are primarily just playing men's sports or turning on cable because it's there, or direct TV. And we're doing something that is just genuinely really hard, because we are tracking all men's sports and all women's sports and then curating that content into the most exciting, most followed, most interesting program every single day. And we are open 363 days a year. So that is an intense amount of work just on its own. And so then am I like, do I scale too fast? Not scaling fast enough on that front is an interesting conversation. Just purely the organizational programming, content production, operations on a day-to-day basis. How do you manage all of that and keep up with it? And then on the sort of the more of the ecosystem of women's sports, the industry sector is changing so rapidly right now. We are starting to see infusion of advertising, sponsor dollars, equity investment, that kind of thing. And sports are starting to take off. More media is being shown. When I opened Rough and Tumble 3 years ago, 3 to 5% of all sports media was what women's sports had. So 96% of everything, written content, TV content, digital streaming, what you saw on your phone and social media, 96% was men's sports. That's shifted in 3 years. We're at about 15% now for women's sports, and we're projected to be around 20 to 22. The latest numbers will come out next year. So we're getting there. It is shifting. But when you think of that very compressed timeline, I mean, most of that shift has happened in the last year and a half. So to increase by 15, percentage points in that period of time, take a step back and start doing some mathing on that. And it's a vast difference. And in order to kind of contemplate that difference, you start to think about how much would have shifted along the way. That's more leagues opening up, more teams being added to those leagues, more sponsorship dollars and partnership deals that, it all starts to compound one on the other. When that happens, that means the industry sector is shifting at lightning speed. That can be very hard to monitor, track, not just like aligned with, but ahead of. And so thinking about how a place like Rough Tumble or business like Rough Tumble fits into that ecosystem and stays relevant and interesting and feeding people's needs, and is probably the thing that I spend more time thinking about than anything else. And not so much from a how do I stay successful perspective, but how do we continue to meet the needs of our customer base, of our fan base, of what women's sports fans are looking for, seeking? How is that demographic changing? What are they asking for? How do we make sure that we're feeding them? And at the same time, how do we continue to remain awesome partners for the leagues, the teams, the retail, companies that we work with and partner with all the time? Because we offer a service and something that they are seeking, and we want to make sure that we're staying on the forefront for those things. So I think it's a little of both.
I mean, what I hear you saying, and I'm going to reference a friend of mine who, by the way, is a big Seattle Storm fan. He used to talk about, are we taking a bigger slice of the pie, or are we embiggening the pie? And what I watch happening with sports is both, right? The pie is getting way bigger. It continues to be the live event that all of us want to gather around and watch at the same time. And women's sports are taking a bigger and bigger and bigger slice. Well, why? Because there are a lot of women, a lot of people on the planet who weren't well served by the sports offerings that were out there. So yeah, I mean, you're getting at the question I'd ask, which is, what is the role for Rough Tumble and for anyone who's creating in-person experiences associated with the rise and, both supporting the rise of women's sports, but also taking advantage of that rise. What are the opportunities going to be in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. And women's sports fans, especially the millennials that are coming up, which is a significant portion, if the majority portion of the fan base, and where a lot of growth is going, they're very experience oriented. They're very community oriented. There's a lot of data to support this, that they want to go places where they have an experience. It's not just, showing up to spend money on beer and food. They want to go where their friends are going to be, where they have memory. It's Instagrammable. They can talk about it. They are building a thicker, deeper, richer community life experience. And they're demanding that we all change to fit that. And it's awesome. And so I think, Rough Tumble really leans into that naturally. We don't have to do a lot. We are programming by simply turning on women's sports. It's not that simple. It's actually pretty hard to do. But that in and of itself. And then, of course, the trivia nights and drag bingo and watch parties for Love Island and, craft night. And these are things that people ask us to provide. And so it's a lot of fun to actually pull it all together too. But there's a lot that's going to change in the next 5 years. I'm really excited. I think Rough Tumble is in the right place at the right time. I mean, I remember getting ready to open and I knew that if I waited 6 more months, we were going to be behind the 8 ball. If I could have gotten open another 3 to 4 months earlier, I would have been a little happier. I think I'm one of those people who says everything happens for a reason and happens the way it's supposed to. And I think because of exactly how Rough Tumble came to life and the timing of how it got started and how we have built the business over the past 3 years, that we're set up for just an incredible amount of success over the next 5 years.
Sounds like it. As you say, I also subscribe to the idea that things happen for a reason, and yet it's fun to speculate about what could happen in the future. And this is the show of West Coast What If questions. So I've got a rapid fire set of what if questions. Hit me back with your rapid fire answers. What if somewhere in the Cascades or Sierras, you could make Mount Rushmore for women's sports? Who would you include?
Oh my gosh. Well, Megan Rapinoe has to go there. Absolutely. Diana Taurasi, Sue Bird. I'm going with all locals. Simone Biles, Sabrina Williams. The list is too long. Billie Jean King. Michelle Akers, should I stop?
We're going to need more mountains is what you're telling me. What if there was a women's sports bar in every stadium district on the West Coast?
It'd be awesome. Why not? I mean, there's sports bars in every stadium district, and they should all be for all of it.
What if ESPN, Amazon, Fox, the sports networks mainstreamed women's sports and delivered true primetime parity?
It would absolutely change how we digest women's sports, would shift, and it would grow the fan base and the leagues at a much faster rate.
What if you could wave a magic wand and make the West Coast a dramatically better place for women athletes and women who love sports?
I would do it in a heartbeat.
What would you do? Aside from open more rough and tumbles?
What would I do? I would invest a lot of money into the arenas, the spaces that they're playing in, the training facilities, make sure that, if they are playing on grass fields, that they're on grass pitches. I would make sure that fans can access those locations quickly and easily. I would remove barriers for access to entry. And also, frankly, that they're big enough. A lot of women's teams play in facilities that are just way too small to actually help grow the fan base, or they're often placed in locations that are really hard to get to. And so that's not really helping grow the fan base very well. When we saw that the Seattle Torrent had their first home game, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, and we sold out Climate Pledge Arena at like nearly 17,000 people. So, the fan base is here. The games are here. I could go on about this forever, but the media has got to step up. We need more women coaches. We need more women behind the microphone and behind the camera, covering the stories so that we're getting equal coverage, that we're playing the games on TV as much. I mean, it all needs to tick up, and it is working. It is going in that direction, and the faster we can do it, the more fun it's going to be.
After talking with Jen Barnes, I can't help but think that what she's doing at Rough Tumble isn't just about spreading sports fandom to women. It's about weaving community and belonging into the architecture of daily life. If we can rethink a sports bar, we can rethink almost everything. If we design spaces to serve women, we're very likely designing for everyone. Representation isn't symbolic, it's structural. It changes who feels welcome in public life. The West Coast has always been a place that loves to experiment, and Rough Tumble is one of those experiments. Joyful, scrappy, grounded, welcoming, and somehow both brand new and long overdue. Women's sports aren't a niche anymore. They're the growth engine of the entire sports industry. Rough Tumble is going to scale up because women's sports are likely to enjoy hockey stick growth for years. When people see women competing, leading, commentating, coaching, anchoring fandom, and building innovative new gathering places, it changes how they imagine leadership everywhere else for everyone, in companies, in communities, and in politics. On the West Coast, the capital of women's sports, as Jen calls it, that influence travels fast. Thanks for being with me in Pacific Time. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone who loves sports or someone who doesn't, but loves the idea of a culture built on inclusion rather than exclusion. And if you want more conversations like this, subscribe, like, and share at Pacific Time Podcast on YouTube. See you next time.